Hello, everyone. Welcome to Growth Room Podcast. Today's conversation is part of our special series, What If I Have 5 Minutes, where we ask successful leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals one simple but powerful question. If you had only 5 minutes to share one message that could change someone's life, what would you say? And today, we have Douglas Katz. I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly.
You did.
Douglas. Okay. So here with me is Douglas Katz to give us his own perspective if he had just 5 minutes. So let's dive in. Douglas, welcome to Growth Podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so let's dive into the big question. If you had just 5 minutes to inspire someone or the world, what would you say?
Okay, now question, because I want a clarification. One person, or I'm changing the entire world?
One person represent the world, so yeah.
Okay. Well, with one person, I would say get outside yourself. Focus on other people and community. And from that, I believe that you really gain purpose. I see this on a couple of different levels. We're a tribal a species, so we need to be together in groups, whether that's globally or individually or smaller groups. But I also think we're a spiritual species too, and I think that the ability to transcend your own wants, needs, and everything else, and move to a point of sacrifice and helping other people and all elevates us in both those areas.
So thank you so much for sharing. So what inspired the message?
I think partly for me, it's now being in my third act. I'm in my 50s, and I've always heard that you gain a degree of perspective and wisdom as you age, and as you look at life and know that you probably have less on this earth than you did when you started. And you're sort of on the backside. You think in terms of what legacy do I want to leave, and I think it's really appropriate right now when you see the global political structure and everything in such turmoil, whether that's a world that I want my kids and maybe someday grandkids to exist in. So I feel very heavily, for me, it's wanting to leave the positive impact. I mean, that's what my business is about too. It's wanting to not add to what is making life and everything difficult these days, but act as an antidote to that.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. For sharing your perspective and yeah. So now, looking back, what was one moment that completely changed the direction of your life?
I think it's hard to pick a moment. And
Yeah.
this is just me philosophically, because I believe that every moment is part of a continuum, that without which the moments that make that up, you don't have that perspective. So I tend to really think in terms of that arc of life, right? I've heard people talk about it being the dash between the birth and the death, or whatever you want to look at it. I did write an article probably over a year now ago, where I was getting really into my head, and it's called 1.3%, because when you're born, based on general actuarial tables, you spend 1.3% of your life every year, which accelerates. And I think that shift in my perspective to say that there's really less time creates introspection to say, then what am I going to do with that time? So I don't think it was this road to Damascus moment of enlightenment. I think it was a reflection on what I've accomplished, how much time I likely have left, and what I want to accomplish. And I believe that changes the inner dialogue that I had.
Okay. If I get you correctly, so if we're going to say a moment that completely changed your life is I go over what you said. Looking that you don't have like much time left. Is that it?
Hopefully I got a couple of decades, but I think it's a decision and a perspective that you need to take on early. Because as I said, this article that I wrote talks about the acceleration of that. So when you get to your 50s, it's probably double that 1.3%. So having a military background and backward planning and just being a person who thinks in a preparatory manner, you don't wait till that number ticks to high double digits. You look and you say, all this takes time and resources and integration and cooperation and collaboration with other people. So I think it's less having little time left. It's more being realistic about what time I do have left and wanting to maximize that. So it's a little bit of a turn, I think, of what you were thinking. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying. So now, what's one challenge or failure you are grateful for now, even though it was difficult at that time?
And I'm not evasive in my answers, but I really look at failure a different way. I don't think that there have been any, oh my God, that was a terrible failure, and I'm going to change how I'm doing things. I believe more for me, I've gotten very much these days into Zen and into Stoicism as guiding posts, one for more in the spiritual and one kind of in the philosophical, and they overlap in a lot of ways. And that combination has a different view of past and failure and dealing with the things that confront you. So maybe it's the exploration and integration of that framework into how I think that is the bigger part than an event or a moment, because now I very much look at things two ways. I look at it, the recognition of what's coming in, and that's the Zen, and then the response, which is, and not reaction, the response, which is that Stoicism. And so for me, failure, I look at failure very differently because that's my response. So if there is something that could be deemed failure, I can either look at that as such. I play a lot of poker, and when you obsess on a failure, or in poker a bad hand, you tend to go on tilt. And when you go on tilt in poker, you make bad decisions, you make rash decisions, you respond in a way that is not productive. And it really, I guess what I was saying is that those two frameworks together change how you view things. If you go on tilt, and I was talking a little bit about poker, you make bad decisions. Your response is heavily influenced by a failure, whether it's just bad luck or something you did incorrectly, versus looking at it and turning it into a lesson. So I not that I don't believe in failure, but I think the true failure of complete lack of application of your skills and your gifts and everything is rarer than people think if you perceive it the right way. And I think a lot of that's driven by my shift to entrepreneurial pursuits as a career, because entrepreneurial life is much more like the real life when you step out of an office. I used to be in corporate America, and there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that come at you, and your success or failure will be heavily based on those responses. So now I've aligned that, the frequencies are more the same in my personal life and that. So I just don't believe in failure as a concept completely. I look at it more as, okay, it's more like on a pinball machine. Failure is when that ball goes straight down the middle and you're done. But more often than not, you're kind of bouncing around and responding to all those things that are either successes or failures, and that ultimately is what runs up the score.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on failure. So now, if you could go back and speak to your younger self, what advice would you give?
Authenticity.
Why? Why is that?
I very much think that many of the problems we have as individuals on a lot of different levels is not knowing ourselves. And as I've studied different philosophies and all, I'm by no means an expert, I'm a dilettante with that, but I have really begun to understand that a lot of challenges do come about when you're trying to fulfill a role that you were not necessarily suited for, or that is not the true you. And I think a lot of times, sometimes is wasted, and energy is wasted trying to conform to a set of rules and norms and other components of things that we deal with. And the one caveat I would say with that is certain rules and norms are laws. There are certain things that obviously are non-negotiable. But I think, as I said, when I talked about being tribal, there's a lot of that isn't in the law and order category, where it's really about trying to be accepted. And the unlock for me, when I finally said, hey, this is me, you like it or you don't. And if you don't like it, then I probably didn't want to interact with you anyhow. That's a big unlock, because when you think about the time wasted trying to convince people who generally just don't gel with you or whatever, or when you're in organizations that are just not architected in a way that work well with who you are, it is a headwind. You're swimming against the current versus finding the places where you can truly exhibit who you are. And that's when the strengths come out, because more often than not, those are highly related to one another.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on
Sure.
yeah, thank you. So what I could get from the conversation is be authentic, right? So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what's one belief or mindset that transformed your life?
I would say owning everything, like owning who you are and what you do. As you saw my bio earlier, and for your
Yeah.
listeners, I was in the military. I went to United States Military Academy, and there was a lot about accountability and sacrifice and character that maybe is part of what I was just talking about with some of the norms and things that are really not negotiable, right? Who you are the small components, but character is a consistent concept. And I would argue to say it's consistent across different cultures and societies and civilizations. There are certain things that define who a good person is and who a person with character is. So I think that concept becomes a good guidepost when you're walking in the dark and you're trying to find where the doorknob is. That adherence to character and honor and all the different things, that if you thought about the people who you respect and look up to or want to be around, it's
Yeah.
usually character. So that concept, I think, has played a lot in where I've gone.
Wow. So now, how can someone begin developing that mindset? How do we start?
You know, I think it's all very interrelated. I think sometimes we fool ourselves into how we think people perceive us, or how the world works. And I think at the end of the day, there's a reason that stuff like the golden rule of just do unto others as you do
Yeah.
unto yourself, and whatever variations of that, I think that it comes down to be the person that you want to hang out with. It amazes me when you see people who complain about others but ultimately don't act, behave, or conduct themselves in a way that they would want people to do for them. So I
Yeah.
think it's a matter of getting pretty realistic about, are you actually walking the walk of what you look at as character in others? And I think many times that there's a big delta there. And for me, as I said, I got into Zen, and Zen talks a lot about ego death. And again, I'm a novice, but the thinking of, am I acting in a way that is to benefit me, or am I acting in a different way? And that's changed everything for me from social media to other
Yeah.
things. What is the purpose? What is my intent when I'm doing something? If my intent is to get affirmation and validation, I guess that's okay as long as I recognize it. But oftentimes, I think that's an empty pursuit, versus when you act in a way of character and you conduct yourself in a manner that you're thinking about legacy and helping others, then you get validated without seeking validation. And I think that would help a lot of people these days.
Yeah, yeah. You get validation.
Mhm.
You get validated. You get validated without seeking
Yes,
validation.
yes.
Okay, got that.
But I would say
So
seeking validation is different than getting it. And
yeah,
I do believe often people seek validation, but will never get it
right.
because the validation will never be enough.
Mm,
It's like wealth. When you look at these, billionaires, and I'm a capitalist. I believe you can make money and all that, but the pursuit of wealth for just the pursuit of wealth or power as a measure of validation is a foolish pursuit. There's a spirit in Native American, some of the Native American cultures called a Wendigo, and a Wendigo is a spirit that if they typically in the story, I think they eat people, and that makes them infinitely hungry. But that analogy of never being able to fulfill that hunger, I think, is the offset of, or the offshoot of seeking the validation and the power and the money and all those things versus just not and doing things in a manner that those come through your behavior, not through the seeking of that as some type of scorecard.
yeah, right. Thank you so much for breaking it down. So now, okay, imagine millions of people are listening right now. What do you hope they remember after this conversation ends?
Oh, you cut out a little bit. I'm sorry.
Okay, so sorry about that. So I'm saying,
No, no.
imagine millions of people are listening right now.
Yep.
What do you hope they remember after this conversation ends?
I think it's interesting when you prepped me for this interview and said, if you had 5 minutes, how would you change people? And I think
Yeah,
it's many times people gravitate to sort of this superpower, right? Like if I was Superman, what would I do? But I
yeah,
think that doesn't work. I would hope that people look and every day make the small decisions that have huge impact. And if enough of us do that, it becomes a chain reaction of positivity. And I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish on that, and that that one little thing changes the world, but it really does. My product, as an example, we make this ergonomic knife, and it's for many disabled people use it. And someone said to us one day, "Thanks for inventing this." And it's not a huge thing that we've created, but the impact of it is exceptionally large, as we've seen. And I feel more and more people need to understand that their small actions then become the stimulus that other people respond to. If I want to go full circle and say how I look at life with Zen and Stoicism, and that the response is what I own. And it is, but only if you're seeking that type of thinking does that apply. But if you're responding and behaving in a way that allows other people to respond more positively, that's what changes the world.
wow, wow. That's cool. That's cool. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Yeah. So okay. Now to wrap up the conversation, there's something I usually do. I will always ask my guests to recommend a book for my audience because the podcast is basically a platform for growth for beginners who are thriving in the digital space. So I always ask my guests to recommend a book. So would you recommend a book for my audience so they can read?
Recommend a book. I hate to say it. I'm a I don't read as much. I'm an oral and visual learner,
Okay.
and I'm trying to think what. Oh, you know what? There's a book that did change my life, and it's kind of grim. But there's a book called The Road. It's a book by Cormac McCarthy,
Okay.
and it it is a fictional book. It takes place after an apocalypse, and it's a
Okay.
father and a son. And earlier on, you asked about concepts that really shape how I behave, and it's a book that more than any other book I've read, and this is in the context of a father and son, but really shows a truly selfless relationship, a relationship where one person sacrifices everything for the other. And when I read that, it changed how I became a father, or how I acted as a father. I was already a father at the time, but it changed the way that even I looked at things. You know, coming out of the military, it's always about sacrifice and what will you do for the guys on the right and the left and all that. But that book really, really affected me in that context. And I think, you know, it was a bestseller. It was like an Oprah book, I guess, and all that. So I'm not the only one, but I think it is a very, very clear, concrete, really beautifully written account of one example of that, although fictionalized, but in a way that is moving and sad, and you know, everything that can kind of pull out those emotions.
Okay, thank you so much for the recommendation. I'll now urge my audience to go read the book. So, is it
It's
something
short.
that?
It's a short book. It's like a one night read, but it's
Yeah.
one where you walk away needing a little mental breather because it's a pretty
Okay.
intense book.
So, is there something else you'd love to share with my audience before we wrap up the conversation?
You know,
Like,
if people like what I'm talking about, I do some writing. I have a blog and I have a Substack. So if they look for douglasmkatz.com, that will take them to my blog, and that has links to everything else. But I do a lot of writing, and really, I don't do it to make money. I do it more now to get my ideas out of my own head and really understand my authentic self. But hopefully, if people want to read it, I think there are good things that maybe can help other people.
okay, thank you so much. So, thank you
Yes,
so much
ma'am.
for on Growth from Podcast and for sharing your perspective and also your journey with us today. Yeah. So for to my audience, if this episode interests you, don't forget to subscribe and recommend somebody to also listen to the episode. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep becoming the best version of yourself. See you in the next episode. So that will be all for today's episode.